Even though they referred to it as a comedy, Mass was never anything but a comedy. As a result of its combination of witty comedy and eerie drama, it managed to transport millions of viewers into a surgical unit during the Korean War that appeared to be all too real. When it was initially broadcast in 1972, no one could have guessed that a half-hour drama would change the face of television, or that its last episode would gather more than 100 million viewers, making it the most viewed scripted program in the history of the United States. However, hidden under the praise and laughing were tales that had never been told before. There were tensions on set, challenges with creativity, and personal disputes that were simmering beneath the surface. Alda is finally speaking up about it, after being silent about it for decades. In a recent interview, Alda discussed the dynamics that occur behind the camera, including a castmate with whom he claims he simply could not get along. This is a unique opportunity to see what goes on behind the scenes. In addition, it demonstrates that even within one of the most well-liked ensembles on television, there were certain members who did not get along with one another. I found the events that took place behind the scenes of MASH to be just as fascinating as the events that took place on screen. And what's more, a significant portion of it is at long last being brought to light. A look behind the scenes at the drama that is real life. This tension could be just as intense, and sometimes even more so, when it is not on TV. Behind the scenes, not everything was as seamless as it appeared to be, despite the fact that MASH was able to attract millions of people with its combination of wit and poignancy. Following his departure from the show, Emlan Stevenson, the actor who brought the pleasant Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake to life, expressed his desire to establish himself as a leading man in another medium. However, once he left in the third season, he came to discover something that he had not imagined. Emlan was not appreciated by viewers. Henry was cherished by them. It was later that he would say that leaving was one of his greatest career regrets, and that his post-MASH endeavors never achieved the same heights as his previous endeavors. Additionally, Loretta Swit, who played the role of Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan, a ferociously capable and frequently underappreciated young woman, came very near to leaving the show. The leading part of Christine Cagney in the television series Cagney and Lacey was offered to her at the beginning of the 1980s. She was the one who was supposed to play the role, but the MASH producers refused to let her out of her contract. Sweet, who was always professional, remained in the character and continued to provide depth and dignity to it, despite the fact that it had developed well beyond its initial one-note conception. A number of characters, including Wayne Rogers, the pleasant and quick-witted trapper John, left the show early. In contrast to his fellow cast members, Rogers never really signed a legally binding contract, which afforded him the freedom to leave the show after only 3 seasons. According to reports, he became dissatisfied with the creative direction of the show, as well as the imbalance in screen time, particularly when Alda's portrayal of Hawkeye began to take the focus. Despite the fact that his resignation was not totally anticipated, it was final. There was also James Farr, who played the role of Corporal Max Klinger, a character that was supposed to appear in only one episode at the beginning of the show's run. Klinger's early storyline, in which he wore women's clothing in the hopes of gaining a Section 8 discharge, was first considered to be a one-off farce. Nevertheless, Farr's natural charisma and exquisite timing developed Klinger into a character that became a breakthrough. Something that could have been a throwaway joke turned out to be a fan favorite, and throughout the course of the show's run, it developed into one of the most straightforward, devoted, and multifaceted characters. He continued to be a part of the show over its whole run of 11 seasons, demonstrating that the most memorable moments in a series might often be coincidental. Despite the fact that the performers gave joy and affection to millions of people, their off-screen experiences were influenced by decisions regarding their careers, disagreements over contracts, and the politics of the studio. Comparable to the kinds of pressures that are present in any workplace with high stakes. In the case of MASH, such tensions occasionally reached a boiling point, but they also contributed to the creation of a show that will be remembered for a very long time. From the fiction to the truth, On screen or off, MASH never demonstrated any fear of the truth. Although the show was legally classified as a sitcom, it pushed the limits of what could be considered a comedy on television on a consistent basis. It was a reflection on the absurdity of war, presented with incisive writing, rich performances, and a feeling of emotional honesty that was uncommon for its time. And at its core, it was a meditation on the absurdity of war. In part, the cast members themselves were responsible for that honesty. The show featured a number of actors who had served in the military in the past. After completing his studies at Fordham University, Alda spent some time serving in the Army Reserve. The actor who played Klinger, James Farr, was a member of the United States Army and participated in the military. He was stationed in Japan and then in Korea just after the war was over. It was impossible to mimic the amount of realism that their performances possessed because of the time they spent wearing uniforms. No, these were not merely roles. Rather, they were reflections of the author's own experiences. The creative decisions that were made behind the camera were also a part of the reality. In the course of the series, the main character, Hawkeye Pierce, was never depicted holding a firearm, a conscious choice that emphasized his dedication to mending rather than causing harm on the other person. It was a remark that was not overt but yet strong, especially during a period of time when violence was frequently glamorized on media. The laughter track is yet another daring selection. During a time when sitcoms depended extensively on pre-recorded laughter, MASH stood out as an exception. There was a fight between the producers and CBS to completely remove it. Despite the fact that the network declined, they did agree to remove any forced laughs from the surgical scenes. This was a subtle acknowledgement that certain situations demanded space rather than punchlines. In the course of the show's progression through the seasons and maturation, even the obligatory laugh track was toned down. The laughter became more subdued and then disappeared, allowing the narratives to breathe and the feelings to surface without any artificial prompts. The fact that MSH is sensitive to both tone and reality sets it different. It wasn't merely a comedy about the war. The subject matter was a study of mankind under stress. Yes, that is funny, but it is also really truthful. Pain, death, absurdity, and survival were all acknowledged, and they were frequently addressed within the same scene. This honesty struck a chord with a great many of people, particularly those who had personally experienced conflict in their own lives. From the perspective of the actors who had witnessed it firsthand, it was more than just a performance. It was quite personal. There are competitions, friendships, and enjoyable times. A family was formed out of the cast of MASH. On the other hand, much like any other family, there were family rivalries, tensions, and heated arguments. When cast members worked side by side for more than a decade, the relationships between them were strong. However, the creative passions that they shared also ran deep, which often led to conflicts between them. Alda and Mike Farrell, who played the well-known duo Hawkeye and BJ, had a very competitive camaraderie with one another. When they were not in front of the camera, the two were continuously challenging each other, not just in terms of performance, but also in terms of physical stunts and playful dares. One of the competitions that they were holding was to see who could become the first person to perfect standing on their hands. At first, it was a lot of fun, but underlying all of the joking around, there was a common desire to test the limits of both their personal identities and the show's. Contradictions that were truly innovative were powered by the same spirit. Farrell has discussed instances in which he had disagreements with writers, and even Alda, on the portrayal of his character, particularly in scenes in which BJ appeared to behave in a manner that was not consistent with his character. That he was so engaged in upholding the role's integrity was demonstrated by the fact that one of these disagreements became particularly heated. For Alda in particular, there was an unwavering respect that existed despite the conflict that existed. With the passage of time, he evolved into a more than just the show's leading performer. As the series progressed, he became its creative core, directing 31 episodes, co-writing 13, and working closely with the producers to determine the series' tone, message, and overall direction. His role was more than just that of Hawkeye. He was in the process of guiding the spirit of MSH. The effect of Alda was all the way up till the very last episode of the show. In the midst of the actors and crew debating whether or not to continue with the project or to bring it to a close, Alda played a pivotal role in guiding the choice. Because of this, the epic series finale, which was titled Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, was extremely personal, had multiple layers of emotion, and was unlike anything that television had ever seen before. The group managed to maintain their connection despite the many conflicts, laughs, lengthy shootings, and creative clashes that took place. The mission that they all believed in was never eclipsed by the differences that they had. We respect the reality of those who lived and served through war, secrets, legends, and one missing teddy bear by telling stories that have value, making people think, and recognizing the realities of those who lived through it. Certain stories from MASH are so flawless that they appear to be made up, yet in reality, they are completely factual. Throughout the years, the boundary between the fictional world of the 477th and the real lives of the cast became increasingly blurry in ways that would be remembered forever. This provided the program with a kind of magic that could not be manufactured by any screenplay. Consider Radar's teddy bear, a scruffy little plush toy that, in the midst of the mayhem of war, became a peaceful symbol of innocence. The bear disappeared for a number of years after the conclusion of the series. It wasn't until nearly 30 years later, when it was rediscovered at an auction, that its whereabouts were finally revealed. It was none other than Gary Boff, the actor who played Radar O'Reilly himself, who emerged victorious in the auction. The event was a complete circle that gave the impression that it had been orchestrated, but in reality, it was not. Additionally, there is Captain Tuttle, a completely fictitious officer that Hawkeye concocted as part of an elaborate hoax against the other officers. Due to the fact that the episode was so convincing, Tuttle was even given credit at the season's conclusion for playing the role by himself. It is still one of the show's most cunning inside jokes, and it is a cheeky bow to the audience. During the final season, the characters made a gesture to the future by burying a time capsule somewhere in the ground. There is a fragment of their narrative that has been left behind for another person to uncover, that was not merely a fantasy from the television. In the months that followed the conclusion of filming, a construction worker discovered the actual capsule, which had been buried in the precise location where the set had been. The event that started out as a symbolic farewell turned into a treasure hunt in the real world that ended in a surprising way. Real life was included into the presentation in every single aspect, even the slightest ones. Not a single one of the framed photographs of Colonel Potter's wife that were displayed on his desk throughout dozens of episodes were fabricated. It was a photograph of the real life wife of an actor named Harry Morgan, B.J. Hunn. It wasn't simply reciting lines when he spoke sweetly about his daughter Erin. He was expressing his affection for her. It was Mike Frell's actual life that inspired the creation of that name. In fact, it was his own daughter who owned it, a hushed tribute that is concealed within the narrative of the character. These fleeting moments, which were sincere, humorous, and frequently unintentional, assisted MASH in establishing a foundation that was more genuine than even the most skilled writers could provide. The viewers were reminded that behind every joke, every speech, and every tear were genuine people who were pouring real pieces of themselves into a show that would go on to mean everything to millions of people. A presentation that has outlasted its conflict. While the Korean War lasted for slightly more than 3 years, MASH continued for 11 years. A total of 256 episodes were produced by the series between the years 1972 and 1983, and they reimagined what a television show could be. Over the course of its existence, it maintained its incisive writing, emotional rawness, and political bravado, all while remaining witty and honest. At a period when the majority of sitcoms were playing it safe, MASH handled issues such as war, loss, love, and morality with an uncommon level of honesty. Despite this, the show was still able to find humor in the most difficult aspects of personal experience. Additionally, the event served as a springboard for aspiring celebrities. Guests such as Ron Howard, Leslie Nielsen, and Patrick Sees, when they were younger, all made appearances before they were famous. This provided viewers with an early opportunity to see the talents of individuals who would go on to become widespread celebrities. Even in episodes that contained only a few sequences, MASH had a way of making people wait and giving them a chance to demonstrate their abilities. On the other hand, behind the scenes, everyone was becoming exhausted from the pace. It was by the 9th season that the performers and writers began to feel the pressure. Following the conclusion of the 10th season, Alda, who serves as the program's creative anchor and emotional core, intended to leave the show. CBS was so determined to maintain the series that they were able to persuade him to remain for an additional year. It was a defining moment in time. The question became inescapable as the 11th season of the show neared. Should MASH be brought back? The actors decided to put it to a vote, an unusual action in the history of television. After serving for more than a decade, the majority of the cast and crew came to the conclusion that it was time to bring the series to a finale. They wanted to terminate the program with dignity and on their own terms, but there were still stories that needed to be told, and they wanted to tell them. The result of that decision was one of the most memorable farewells in the history of the entertainment industry. MASH bowed out with intention and grace, with the intention of leaving behind a legacy that would continue to resonate long after the last helicopter had flown off. This is in contrast to the majority of long-running series that either disappear or overstay their welcome. We will never say goodbye, but farewell. MASH's final episode was a significant moment in the history of television. More than 100 million people are seeing something that is very personal and deeply emotional. Nevertheless, in spite of what viewers seen on television, this was not the final episode that the cast shot. As time goes by, a more subdued and introspective edition is the one that holds this distinction. In this installment, the group come together to create a time capsule and bury it beneath the camp, a symbolic farewell not only to their fictional life, but also to the actual experience of making television history together as a group. During that particular instant, they were not merely bidding farewell to Korea. Having the knowledge that everything they had done had been significant, they were burying a part of themselves in the earth. Off-screen, many of the relationships that were established during those 11 years have remained strong throughout the years. There was a particularly tight relationship between Harry Morgan, the actor who played Colonel Sherman Potter, and Loretta Swit, who was responsible for giving Major Margaret Houlihan a sense of strength and complexity. In the years that followed the conclusion of the show, they continued to be neighbors and friends until Morgan's death in 2011. Additionally, Swede kept a strong connection with Alda and his family throughout his life. Relationships that are established not only on work, but also on years of having shared experiences of development, laughter, and grief. Through it all, there is one picture from the series that continues to stick with me. In a single instant, the essence of MASH was condensed into existence. With a worn-out smirk on his face and no weapon in his possession, Hawkeye stands in the heart of the conflict. All he had was his wit, his exhaustion, and his determination to get better, not to cause harm. The decision to make compassion his sole weapon conveyed a great deal of information about the individual, the performance, and the message that continues to reverberate in modern times.